Kia ora everyone, and welcome to the RVA Energy Efficiency Workshop. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be a practical and highly relevant session for retirement village operators and managers. With rising operating costs, increasing pressure on infrastructure, and growing expectations around sustainability, energy efficiency is becoming an important focus area for villages across New Zealand. Today's workshop has been designed specifically for our sector, providing practical guidance on reducing energy use, managing costs, and planning for the future. My name is Amanda Boyd, Chief Membership Manager at the Retirement Villages Association, and I'll cover a few housekeeping items before we get started. This is an interactive workshop, so we encourage you to participate in the breakout discussions and make the most of the opportunity to learn from your peers. Throughout the session, please use the Q&A function to submit any questions you may have. We'll have time for questions at the end, and we'll also be asking you to contribute your thoughts during the breakout activities. Today's workshop is being delivered in partnership with EECA and Lumen, and we're fortunate to have three highly experienced presenters joining us. First, we have Paul Bull from EECA. Paul brings extensive experience across New Zealand's energy sector, having worked in fuel, electricity, gas and LPG markets throughout his career. Over the past decade, he has led a range of EECA programs supporting organisations to reduce emissions, improve energy performance and transition to lower carbon operations. Joining Paul is Meg Wakefield, Sector and Indirect Lead at EECA. Meg began her career as an EECA-supported graduate before working as an energy engineer at Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. Today, she works closely with businesses and sectors across New Zealand to support energy efficiency and decarbonisation initiatives. We're also pleased to welcome Paul Farrelly, Principal Consultant in the Energy and Carbon team at Lumen. Paul has worked with organisations across a wide range of industries, helping them develop practical energy and carbon strategies, identify opportunities for improvement, and implement solutions that deliver real results. Thank you all for being here today. Over the next 2 hours, we'll be covering three key areas. We'll begin with an overview of the energy market, including future outlooks, infrastructure considerations, and some practical insights into negotiating energy supply contracts. We'll then move into energy efficiency, where we'll look at measuring and monitoring energy use, establishing a culture of energy saving, and identifying practical low and medium cost opportunities that retirement villages can implement. After a short break, we'll explore transition planning and technology options, including moving away from gas, developing a transition roadmap, financing opportunities, and the role that solar and battery technology may play in the future. Along the way, there will be breakout discussions, practical examples, and plenty of opportunities to learn from each other's experiences. Our goal today is for everyone to leave with practical ideas and a clearer understanding of the next steps they can take to improve energy efficiency outcomes within their village. With that, I'll hand over to Paul to get us underway. Paul, welcome.
Thanks, Amanda. Morena, everybody, and thanks for taking some time out of your morning. I hope that you do take away some key insights from the presentations this morning. I am going to just start off with a little bit of a market overview, and we'll pass to Meg partway through, so that you don't have to listen to my dulcet tones for all of this morning. Rough agenda, which Amanda's run through. And so for those of you who have not had much to do with EECA in the past, we are a Crown agency, one of the few delivery agencies across government, driving interactions across the marketplace. A lot of people do know us for our Warmer Kiwi Homes home insulation program, but Meg and I both work in our business engagement program. EECA strategy is very much focused on mobilising all New Zealanders to be leaders in clean and clever energy use. And importantly, the three pillars that underpin that are energy efficiency first, and really looking forward to Paul talking us through some of that practical stuff from the great work Lumen's been doing across the sector. We also look at empowering energy users, smart use of energy, and then helping people understand that transition into renewable energy, so accelerating the uptake of renewable energy as that third pillar. In part one, just going to very quickly do market outlook and so talk around a little bit on the procurement and contract levers that you might or might not have within your business. Now, the challenges that New Zealand faces are complex. I think most energy-related news media stuff that we see over the past month or so tends to talk to energy strategy, availability of fuels, and underlying a whole lot of that is increased price of energy. And we're all facing that, whether that's individually at home or within our businesses. What are some of the key drivers, particularly around natural gas in the North Island and electricity prices, is a diminishing gas supply market. Natural gas has been important in our electricity sector for many years as that thermal fuel that's used when we don't have water in the lakes to make electricity and rely upon some other energy form to provide that backup. And we've had some great resource over the last 40 or 50 years to underpin that electricity market, but as those fields come towards the end of their life, it has become more challenging, probably none more so than the winter of 2024, where we saw some extreme pricing in that market, which has flowed through into the price that we all pay for electricity. And if you're in the North Island and using natural gas, then there's a fairly good chance, unless you're still on a slightly older contract, that you will have seen increased pricing, and in some and many cases, actually trying to get a contract can be challenging, particularly for those that were trying to renegotiate in 2024. I think it is worth just spending a couple of minutes understanding the impacts of natural gas, as I say, not only for those in the North Island using it, but as it flows through into electricity generation. So this graph here on the left, the stacked bar graph shows that around 120 petajoules of gas is used per annum across the gas system. And the graph on the right shows what the decline in the gas fields will mean in terms of available gas from the amount of gas we've got available this year out until 2040. So in 2040, they're predicting that the gas field declines will deliver around 20 petajoules of gas on an annual basis going forward beyond that time. Currently 120 petajoules. I think if the article on the extreme right talks about Methanex confirming that it's going to close when the Maui gas field shuts down. And the indication is that if it's not later this year, it will be early next year. There's some major compliance recertification costs for Maui coming up. And so likely that those will occur because they are some extremely large numbers, which will mean that will be the end of that gas field in terms of it not being able to operate without its compliance and the necessary certifications. And so you see Methanex disappear around that same time from the market. Electricity generation is becoming less reliant on natural gas, and we've seen that replaced with a large stockpile of coal at the Huntly plant. Genesis runs and talk of maybe conversion into black pellet biomass into the future when that product becomes available in the New Zealand market. So if you took those two top segments off the graph, it still leaves around 60 petajoules of gas for industrial, commercial and residential users. And no time that I ever went to school did 60 ever fit into 20. And so there will need to be market migration in order for those that need to be staying on gas out in the late 2030s and into the 2040s, that they are the right customers or users of gas in that 20 petajoules. I think the challenge, if you happen to be one of those in 2040, is the price of gas is going to be extremely expensive. Definitely is not going to get cheaper. What's driving that decline? This graph here represents the latest redetermination of gas, and so for the energy nerds amongst us, which maybe only myself and Paul today, or one or two others, the P2 reserves is the availability of the probability of gas coming out of the gas fields, and so P2 is that reserve which gives them the most comfort. And so you'll see significant decline over the years. The orange is the Porikura gas field and significant decline. Maui also on the decline. The redetermination says there's 738 petajoules of P2 reserve. Go back to the previous graph of 120 petajoules. So the more years we run at 120 petajoules means we're going to use that 738 up. If we can get rid of that top portion, get to 60 petajoules, then 60 into the remaining does stretch it out. And so if I crudely went, if you get rid of the 120-ish this year, left 60, that would mean you've got about 600 petajoules. So it's about 10 years supply. A number of those will disappear, which is why that number looks at 20 petajoules being available in 2040. I could talk all day on gas, but I'm going to pass over to Meg to take us through the other challenges with energy.
Thanks, Paul. Let's quickly jump into my slides. There we go. Is that coming through?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Paul, for running through what's happening with gas supply. There's definitely quite a lot of change happening in that space. There are also significant changes going on in the electricity sector at the same time. So yeah, just looking back to pre-1990, we can see that the paradigm then was a dispatch supply to meet demand approach. That was no longer the case for the last 3 decades. The network moved into more of an optimization approach. So obviously there was some new generation built, but the focus was absolutely on optimizing and getting the most efficiency as possible out of the existing infrastructure. Looking forward to for the era that we're now in, the post-2020, and the paradigm has shifted again. We've entered an era of rapid and wide-reaching electrification of energy demand. And so those previous 2 operating models just aren't suited to this. As a result, we're seeing another change in approach. It's actively developing at the moment, and it's basically flipping that pre-1990 narrative on its head. So rather than supply being dispatched to meet demand, we're now seeing a focus on dispatching demand to meet supply. Importantly, for this model to operate well, demand, flexibility, and end-user participation are both crucial enablers. So that means that rather than the electricity all flowing one way through the system as it used to, we're moving more towards active bi-directional use of those distribution networks. And this is very quickly becoming the new norm. And when we look to the reason why we're shifting to this decentralized model, it's essentially because virtually all of the electricity scenarios for New Zealand show that demand is going to grow. The example that I've got here is from Transpower, which is the national grid operator. And you can see that we've got growth of those 5 different future scenarios, all showing growth. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment also has had some modelling done, which show a similar spread, even though the scenarios are slightly different. Worth pointing out, of course, that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I guess the key takeaway here is just that the demand for electricity out to 2050 is almost certainly going to grow somewhere between a bit and a lot. And of course, not all of that is going to be met by a decentralised model. So there is significant new generation planned also. Yeah, looking at the generation pipeline for New Zealand, we can see that there is quite a big upswing in expected generation deployment, and most of that is going to be in wind and solar. Along with that development, the development of those wind and solar generation assets, it's expecting that the marginal cost will be lower. However, renewables have lower capacity factors, which essentially means that you still need to have some sort of a cover in case they're not available when demand is there on the network. That means that fossil generation will still be required, but then it's expected that it will mostly be required for dry year cover, as you will have heard about a lot in the media with everything that's going on with the LNG terminal. With deployment of generation, of course, there's still risks. So with more low-cost renewables, do tend to see lower, but also more variable wholesale pricing. If we do find that we end up in an excess of renewables, that might actually result in some projects being withdrawn from the construction pipeline. Consenting holdups are always a thing as well. There's always going to be construction bottlenecks and commissioning issues as well. Fast track consenting in particular doesn't necessarily always live up to its name. And any of these delays, whether it's in the deployment or the decision-making phase, does tend to lead to cost increases, which will inevitably extend New Zealand's reliance on fossil generation. But risks aside, the generation pipeline and modelling implies that the conditions that we're currently seeing in the electricity market of tight supply, low security, and quite a high dependence on gas and coal are painful, but should be temporary. And of course, further generation can't fix the issue of peak demand is one of the other things that needs to be considered. So most of you will know that electricity demand is not stable throughout the day. There tends to be a couple of peak demand periods, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and I've got an example of that coming up on the next slide. So not only does the pipeline of renewable energy present some challenges to the system because renewable energy is variable in nature, so we can see that electricity supply could become squeezed when those resources aren't available, as for example, cold weather sends peak demand higher. But it's also expected that as overall demand for electricity increases, the peak demand across the country will increase. So New Zealand is actually looking at potential infrastructure capacity issues. And as mentioned here is the example curve. Eagle-eyed members of the audience will notice that this is for a typical household, but it is fairly representative of the whole country aggregated together. So you can see here it does have that peak in the morning and then also in the evening. And this higher demand is just driven by things like the timing of business kicking off of the day, everything being turned on, particularly heat systems tend to have quite a large draw. And then in the evening, we see that second peak driven by people getting home, starting to cook, heating the house, showering, and also the second startup for organisations that run multiple shifts. And one of the ways that we can combat this effect of peak demand rising as electrification rises is built into that post-2020 model that I mentioned earlier, and specifically utilising what we refer to as demand flexibility. So what demand flexibility does is basically smooths out those peaks by shifting consumption to other times of the day. The amount of energy used over the day doesn't necessarily change. It might be the same or even higher, but by shifting it to different times, the amount of pressure on both the generation assets and on the grid capacity can be reduced significantly. it's worth doing. One Transpower estimate of savings is that consumers will save $1.5 billion per gigawatt of demand that's shifted away from those peak demand times. These savings, of course, will allow for investment in further transmission and distribution infrastructure to be deferred, and for the costs associated with building them to be more effectively and sustainably recovered over time. It does require, oh, sorry, I don't know how I managed to zoom in then. Where are we gone? Moving to a demand flexibility model will require enhanced coordination and, yeah, as mentioned earlier, shifting away from that purely efficiency focus to very much a resilience and redundancy-based grid design and operating model. This is going to require new coordination and financial instruments such as peer-to-peer, community energy trading, demand aggregation services, green financing, and rent-to-own. So there is a lot happening across every single facet of the electricity sector at the moment to understand how that might all look. And so you're probably wondering what demand flexibility looks like in real-world terms. So how do you actually deploy it? There's quite a few different ways, and I've just put a few of the examples up on this slide. We tend to refer to these as distributed energy resources. One that's getting a lot of the spotlight at the moment, of course, solar. And then also linking in with battery storage. Vehicle to grid is another option for deploying demand, I guess you can say, by using your vehicle as a mobile battery. And then thermal mass is another option for actually enabling demand response. Some of you probably be familiar with the ripple control system that were in domestic hot water cylinders, and you can see large basically commercial and industrial versions of this. That lower middle image there is of what is essentially an enormous hot water tank at a nursery site, and refrigeration and freezers can be used in the same way. You can build your thermal mass up while electricity is cheap and then just kind of glide through those peak demand times. Looping back to solar, of course, because generally people are pretty interested in this. We've found that there are still a few myths kicking around, that it doesn't work everywhere, or that it costs too much, or that it's actually bad for the environment. And most of these are no longer true. We've got the next slide actually shows a report that EECA had done that demonstrates that commercial scale solar is feasible across New Zealand. Usually expect to see about $1,500 to $2,000 per kilowatt of installed capacity. And most of the suppliers these days now offer recycling options, and the panels themselves are a lot less energy intensive and have better efficiency than they did even just a decade ago. So the link on this page is a little tool that EECA's worked up. So if you're interested in solar for your operations, then you can throw in a few figures and get a ballpark estimate of whether or not solar is a good fit for you, and it'll give you an idea of the payback. So yes, it's definitely worth investigating if solar or other demand flexibility options would work for your operations. And it's especially worthwhile doing if you've a contract coming up or you're shopping around for a new electrical supplier. I'll pass back over to Paul for covering off on the supply contracts piece. But yeah, he'll be speaking a little bit more detail about the time of use plan and how to negotiate getting some of these benefits.
Thanks, Meg. Do you want to stay on the slides rather than me relaunching? So
Yep.
if you just go to the next slide, thank you. And so that is a nice segue. You know, if you're considering solar and you are, you do need to look at your contract because there are some, particularly time of use contracts, that do put a penalty in place if you're consuming off solar behind the meter. So self-consuming any generation before any excess is put into the market. So just a wee tip there. Have a look at your contract, because one or two of the suppliers do penalise you for that. And I guess in balance, that's because they're offering a contract with a particular volume of electricity that they're provisioning for you from their generation portfolio. Before I was at EECA, and I do sit on the All of Government Advisory Panel for procurement of electricity and natural gas. I worked for one of the major electricity generator retailers and sold a lot of gas and electricity and LPG contracts during my time there. So understand the other side of the fence in terms of who's an attractive customer that gets a better price. Meg talked a little bit about the two humps of a profile load. Those two peak times across the system tend to be the two most expensive times in the day and time of year, winter. Those peaks become even more expensive than those peaks would become in summer. And so the profile of your load will impact your price. And so the ability to smooth your load through storage of some form or controls, flatten your load, may make your volume slightly more attractive. Likewise, joining with some others to get what we would call diversity of load, so stacking your loads up together, and hopefully your peaks aren't all at the same time to make those peaks even worse. And so for some of the bigger village owners, within the sector, with multiple sites, they will get a little bit of that diversity across their portfolio. But if you're a single site or maybe two-site operator, the ability to join up with others, whether other village owners or other businesses within your town or city, to get a collective and a flatter load, may mean your offer's more attractive to the electricity retailers than just your load on its own. But the other thing that is important is when should I go to the market? And Meg, if you could go to the next slide this time. The underlying market price and what's happening in the market will dictate what price comes back to you whenever you look for a price from the market, particularly in the time of use or larger electricity space. These two graphs here show the pricing from, it's called the ASX market, which is the 3-year future price market. So it's a publicly disclosed price where the electricity generator retailers are trading hedges amongst themselves. So you'll notice the profile's the same, but the underlying difference is the graph on the left, as you look at it, is sitting up with its lower price in the $75 to $100, and the upper end being in the 180 to 200 and above. Whereas the graph on the right, the whole line has shifted down, and so the lower price is sitting at around $60 and the upper is sitting at around 160 to maybe 175. And so in my mind, if you were to go to market when pricing sitting on the graph on the right, then you're likely to get a lower price in the market. The difference between those two graphs is actually only 3 months, so it's March this year and June of this year. What's driving that change? The lakes are full. And so this coming winter, the generator retailers have some comfort that they've got enough energy to make electricity. Typically, winter snowmelt gives them comfort over summer. And so until there's some signs that we're going to have a hot, dry summer and no water going into next winter, they'll make some assumptions that, next winter's probably looking okay at this point as well, which just drags the price down. So if you're on a time of use contract, I would expect a significantly better price now than 3 months ago. And so going to the market at the right time is definitely going to impact the price you get back. If your contract expires in April, just gone, and you went to market in March, you have no option but to either accept the price you get presented or go uncontracted at a time when the market prices are high. My guidance was go early, go as early as you can. When I was selling contracts, I often look to extend contracts 12 months out. But 6 or 9 months beforehand will give you the opportunity to have a second go at the market if the prices don't look quite where they should be. I am going to pass over to Paul from Lumen, and Paul also has worked for a generator retailer in the past. And so, Paul, not sure if you've got any other comments you wanted to add into the section before you take over.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I reiterate the point that probably timing when you go to market is the most critical factor in securing a good price, but it's also impossible to predict what's going to happen in New Zealand's electricity pricing. So what we tend to do is we'll advise a client when we think it's a good time to go to market based on that futures curve and conditions. So hydro lake levels have a big impact on near-term wholesale pricing. They don't have much of an impact 2 years out. So the biggest variable normally is the hydro lakes, and to try and avoid the risk of a dry scenario, we generally advise clients to test the market probably 6 months out to probably no later than 3 months out, and try and lock in during that window. And I guess the other key factor that we really look at is the term that you lock in for. So some clients like to lock in for, say, 5 years. Others like to go shorter term, 2 to 3 years. I guess those that locked in for 5 years back in 21, maybe even early 2022, did particularly well. Others that came off contract in 23, 24 were exposed to some pretty high spot pricing in the last few years. So there's a little bit of luck involved, I think, when you go to market. The only other thing I'd just say, because I know there's some portfolio operators on the call, is that a strategy that I've seen some of the supermarket chains and banks and others that have lots of sites is they don't take all of their sites to market at the same time. They stagger it maybe they might put it into tranches. So they maybe have split their portfolio into, say, 3, and every year they typically take a 3-year contract, and they take a third of the portfolio to market each time. And that sort of takes out some of that volatility that we've seen over the last few years. So that's a strategy that could be adopted as well. But if you've only got one site, obviously, it comes down to trying to time it as best as you can, and then just taking a term that you think is the right term at the time. Cool. All right, I'm going to try and share my slides now. Hope this will work. Let me know if we are good. Does that come through, Paul?
Yes, but you need to go to presenter mode. You need to swap your screens over.
That should be in presenter mode. Let me see.
Yeah, no, we're seeing your slide in the next slide.
Oh,
you need to swap your screens.
Hang on. Okay, I'll try that again. So I'm operating on one computer this morning, so it's a little bit tricky to get them all to get it aligned. How's that?
Perfect. Thanks, Paul.
Cool. Okay, so just introduction to Lumen. We're an engineering consultancy, employee-owned, that's been operating in New Zealand and more recently Australia since 2004. The team that I'm part of is our energy and carbon group, and we're specialists. Well, we started out being specialists in energy efficiency, and over time, I guess our offerings evolved to decarbonisation, And increasingly, I guess energy is getting more and more complex. So we've been doing quite a lot of strategic work with clients around things like procurement, solar, batteries, all that sort of stuff. So it is evolving. We've been an EECA program partner, I think, since our inception. We've done over 300 on-site projects since 2004, including 25 detailed retirement village assessments. We also co-developed EECA's aged care sector decarbonisation pathway, and there's some really good tools online on the EECA website. I think Paul's going to share that link a little bit later on. And I think looks like there's a few of our clients are on the call today as well. So good to see you here. Right. How do we help? There's a number of ways that we can assist, as my sort of shameless sales pitch for a Friday morning. So we do everything from energy audits. We've done a lot of fuel switching feasibility over the recent times, looking at the business case for moving off gas or LPG. A lot of solar PV and battery storage feasibility more recently. So, deciding on the right size system and helping with procurement of solar as well. And I guess my bread and butter, my background with 9 years at Meridian prior to joining Lumen, is the energy supply contracting and things. So I think in my role at Meridian, I probably was on the receiving end of thousands of pricing opportunities. So I've got a good insight into how that works. And if you want to talk to us, you can visit www.lumen.net, or just you can contact me directly if you like. So what we're going to talk about in this next section is really energy efficiency, and we're focused on, I guess, on the lower cost aspects of improving your energy performance, as opposed to sort of the bigger ticket items that we'll cover a little bit later on around fuel switching. So first things first, is the fundamental place to start really is to understand how you're charged for energy. And I think we've talked a little bit about time of use already in the webinar today. In my experience, most retirement villages will be on time of use metering. So what that means is that you get different charges at different times of the day. So understanding what those charges look like, and there'll be different rates in winter, different rates in summer. So it's important that you understand that. That's the energy charges piece of it. Secondly is network charges, also transmission and distribution charges, which are included on your retail bill. And these have been going up and up and up, and will continue to go up as more and more investment goes into both the transmission, so the national grid, and the local distribution networks. And these charges are, in some cases, as big as the energy charges, and what we typically find is they're not that well understood. And one of the reasons for that is that they are different across the country. Each lines company, Orion, Vector, Electra, etc., all have their own way of doing things, and so those charges can be quite different. And then you have some fixed daily charges as well. Generally not a lot you can do about those, because they're based on the size of connection that you have, and same with gas. So if there were 3 things that you could do immediately that we would suggest are worth doing, first is get data from your retailer for electricity. You can get half-hour data. It's free to get that, and what that does is it shows you exactly when you're using power, and I've got some examples of that shortly. Secondly, understand your contracts. You're probably on time of use pricing, but you may not be, or you might be on sort of an any time where the price is the same day or night. And for gas, do you have any minimum or maximum volume requirements? They're in most gas contracts these days. And as Paul said, you might even have a solar clause in your electricity contract that might penalise you a little bit if you put solar on, so worth being aware of that. And also, when do your contracts expire? So if you're coming up pretty soon, you want to start planning for your new contract. Then understanding those network charges, as I say, they do vary by network. So understanding that is pretty critical, particularly as you're looking at reducing your energy costs. So understand get hold of some bills and have a look at what's going on there, and see if you can get that data from your retailer. In terms of ongoing measuring and monitoring, best practice really, as we see it, involves 4 continuous steps. So firstly is to track and trend, so get that data and start plotting it. And we would generally say that because energy usage in this sector is pretty seasonal and pretty driven by heating, you can't really compare 1 month to the next. That's, you're going to see a reduction of energy as you come out of winter and go into summer, and vice versa. You're going to see an increase as you go out of summer and into winter. So you really need to trend it over a longer time. And what you want to be looking at is essentially what happens in April 2006 versus April 2005. That's going to give you more insight than comparing 1 month to the next. There is a benchmarking tool on the EECA set of tools that you can download, and that gives, you could put your data into that, and it'll give you some indications of how you go relative to others in the sector. It is pretty high level, and in reality, every village is a little bit different. So it'll just, I wouldn't read too much into it, but it might give you an idea of how you track at a high level. Really, the benchmarking and targeting is against your own performance. Once you set some targets, it's all about action. So, have a plan and then start implementing the opportunities that you've identified, and track those as you go. We're going to touch on some of those opportunities today. So yeah, measure it, ongoing measuring. Check the changes that you've made. Have they made a difference? Did it work as much as you thought? Was it a little bit less? And if you do that, you can prove that investments that you've made are delivering. And if you've got a portfolio, I guess, proving the case on one site probably allows you to build confidence moving into rolling that out across a wider portfolio. In Lumen's experience, so over the 25 sites we've done, but we've sort of looked at other sites from the high level. What we find on average is that most of the time HVAC and space heating is the #1 energy user in a retirement village or aged care. 39% is the average. So this is across all energy usage, but that ranges from 25 to 55%. Secondly is hot water, domestic hot water. Quite a large range there. Somewhere it can go from 14 up to 40%, but that's definitely second behind space heating. Then, depending on what facilities are at the village, laundries can often be the next highest source. If you have a pool and in a spa, the average is 8%, but that's a bit misleading because it can be as much as 25% of the village consumption. Particularly if it's a large swimming pool and maybe a relatively small kind of care facility in that village, you'll find that the pool and spa heating can be quite a significant portion. Then we got kitchen and cooking, a little bit less there. Lighting, that 7% is probably a little bit overstated in the current environment, where most, but not all, but most villages have already converted to LED. So when we started doing audits, it was a much higher percentage than what it is now. And then you've got refrigeration and appliances, which is a bit smaller than the others, but it still adds up, and there's a few things you can do there. What we have seen is that on average, electricity is about 62% of the energy on site, and thermal fuels most of the time, almost every case, is either natural gas in the North Island and LPG in the South Island. There's the odd site that has diesel, not too many of those, and I think there might have even been one down south that had coal. That was a few years ago though. If we then just look at fossil fuel, so LPG or natural gas, the main users, there's the odd site that has fossil fuel powered space heating, not too many, typically older villages, but almost always the main gas user in a village is domestic hot water. Then it'll be laundries and dryers if they're on site, followed by pool and spa heating. As I say, it might be a bit higher if it's a smallish site with a large pool, and then on to kitchens and cooking. So the percentages that I've highlighted are across total energy, but this is just to highlight where the main what the main gas users are. So if we download our data from a retailer and we plot it on a simple monthly view, what we've got here is just a comparison of a typical South Island site and a typical Auckland site. And these are villages where the gas and LPG supplies, the hot water, kitchens, and a small laundry. These ones don't have pools. It looks a bit similar when you look at it from from afar, but if you drill into it a little bit, what we see is the South Island electricity usage is far more seasonal than what Auckland's or the Upper North Island profile is. So we see in the South Island, electricity can, between February and July, it can double to be to 2.5 times more. Whereas in Auckland, it's much more consistent, albeit there is still a winter peak there, and you can see July is the highest month in Auckland. Whereas the gas usage is a lot flatter across a year. So important to understand that seasonality. As I say, if you're comparing performance, you can't really compare July to December. So you need to look at the previous year against the current year, month by month, really to understand what your trend is. And then what we do when we get that data from the retailer, the detailed half-hour data, is we will plot a graph like this that shows us the electricity demand by time of day. And so this is an example in Christchurch. On the left there, we've got the June month, which is at the higher end. I think June and July are the highest 2 months, and then January, where electricity usage is lower. So we get some pretty good insights from this chart. Firstly, we can see that electricity usage peaks in the morning and lesser peak, but still a peak in the evening. So 8 to 10 a.m. is peak time for this site, particularly in winter mornings. The spaghetti on the left, you'll see lots of little squiggly lines there. So that's day by day. So you can see there's a huge variation across the month from the lowest squiggly line to the highest squiggly line, and that tells us that the electricity usage is heavily correlated with outside air temperature. So the bottom line will be a warmish Canterbury day, probably nor'wester, and the upper ones will be a frosty morning. We then look at it, the average across business days and non-business days. In some sectors, this is really relevant because consumption differs by weekday and weekend, but almost all retirement villages and rest homes, there's no difference between weekdays and weekends. And another key factor or key bit of information from this graph, particularly the one on the left, is if we look at the peak load there, it occurs on around about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and in this particular month, the highest recorded was around the 275 kVA mark. So if we're thinking about potential fuel switching and converting some of our gas usage to electricity, we're going to potentially add to that peak. So we need to understand what impact that will have, how much it'll push that peak up, and also we need to also understand what our limit is in terms of electrical capacity. But I'm going to talk a bit about that later on in the presentation. And I guess just before I move on, the other thing, and we've touched on it earlier, is if you're on a time of use tariff, your highest rates are likely in that morning peak period, so between 8 and 12 a.m. Things have got a little bit better in terms of pricing in recent times, but I have seen some contracts where the pricing for June and July in that 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. window can be as high as 45 cents per kilowatt hour. So really, targeting reducing your consumption in those peak periods is a pretty key thing in terms of mitigating costs. And also some of the lines charges are based on peak usage as well. So yeah, really understanding when your peaks occur and looking for opportunities to take load out of those peaks is a smart thing to do. Right, on to some practical tips for saving energy. I'm going to go through just the key areas of consumption. A lot of this is pretty basic stuff, so I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly. So number one energy user in villages is heating and ventilation. So some list of things you can do there. This one's an interesting one. So the heaters are on in the middle of the day, and the doors open. So and I think it's quite warm outside as well. So this is just the sort of thing that we see on site all the time, where often things are turned on in the morning and then left on all day, even though the building temperature has reached the target or even exceeded it. So there's definitely stuff that can be done on site. One of the things that we always recommend is making sure that your systems are not fighting one another. So if you've got one space that's trying to heat and another space that's trying to cool, they're basically fighting each other and wasting a lot of energy. So using a dead band setting is a smart thing to do. Some of the obvious stuff here, turning off radiators when outside temperatures are warm. As I say, you often see things cold morning, everything is cranking, and then it continues heating during the day and the building gets too hot. So turning the heating down or off makes a lot of sense. Another thing that we've been thinking about, and I know some operators are experimenting with this, is if you go back to the energy usage chart I showed where your peak loads are occurring early in the morning, is actually setting, maybe heating up the space before your peak charges come in, and then potentially turning down the heating during that window to try and manage those charges. Typically, we would say that you don't need to heat up the space for more than an hour before occupancy. But yeah, just thinking about peak loads occurring in that window, maybe there's some strategies around heating the space up earlier and then sort of tapering off in that peak period. Hot water, second biggest user of energy. Basic stuff, maintenance. Make sure anything that's leaking or dripping is fixed immediately. Check your hot water storage temperature is right. You don't want it to be too hot because you're wasting energy, but you obviously have to manage that Legionella risk, so there is a minimum temperature that you have to store it at. Cleaning can be quite a large user of hot water as well, so make sure that your cleaning staff have got good practices around the use of hot water and they're not overdoing it. Low flow shower heads are a really smart thing to have. What we're looking for there is a shower that runs at less than 8 litres a minute. And there's a simple test you can do. If you get a 2-litre jug and fill it, it should take longer than 15 seconds. If it's less than 15 seconds, then you got too much water coming out. Lighting, obviously, traditionally lighting was quite a bigger user in these type of sites. But over time, as LEDs have largely been converted, the energy demand and usage for lighting has come down. However, it's still significant. So a few things here. At the end of an evening, and you've got cleaners coming through, make sure that there's a responsibility for them or someone to make sure the lights are switched off at the end of the space being occupied. If there are lights that require manual switching off, someone needs to be responsible for that. Lighting controls are always a good idea, particularly where you can link them to daylight sensors or occupancy sensors as well. And if you still have LED lights, if you still have non-LED lights, what you want to do is prioritize the highest use areas first. And we're going for time. Swimming pools, if you have a pool, can be quite a large user. We say reduce pool operating hours where possible. I know that everyone wants to look after their residents, but if you have relatively low utilization of a pool, you may want to think about reducing the hours that it operates. I don't know how that will go down, but from an energy management point of view, it would be a sensible thing to do. If you've got a pool cover, you should definitely use it. It reduces evaporation, so that's heat coming essentially out of the pool and then creating condensation or moisture in the air. So both you need to heat the pool more and you need to clear out that moist air and replace it with outside air. So there's a double whammy there. Look at optimizing your operating schedules and your pool pumps to match the actual usage pattern. So track when people actually come in and use the pool. And lastly, maybe worth looking at whether or not you're over ventilating the space, and potentially look at heat recovery. So there is a lot of heat, exhaust air that's leaving due to ventilation requirements. So you may be able to capture that heat and reuse it. Laundries, if you have laundries on site, it's pretty basic stuff. Run full loads only. Make sure that the maintenance is up to date. Match the water levels with the requirements. And there's a couple of things at the bottom. We know that there has been a bit of interest in putting ozone laundry systems in. They, in theory, are very energy efficient because you use less hot water. So on paper anyway, sounds like a good thing. I'm not aware of too much wide-scale deployment of that in New Zealand, but I know overseas it's been utilised. And the last one there is you may want to consider outsourcing laundry to a specialist provider, particularly if you are looking to convert to electrical and you don't have electrical capacity available to run a laundry. That was something you might want to consider. Onto kitchens. Probably the thing we see in kitchens a lot is like everything running, all the elements on, gas, a lot of heat coming in the kitchen, because the kitchen staff want to be ready to go when someone rings up and orders an omelette or whatever. So we say, try and only use the equipment when it's needed, but I know practically that may not always be practical. But yeah, I think sort of monitoring kitchen staff and having some sort of policies around that is probably a good idea. There's a ventilation thing here as well. I often see extractor fans running overnight. They don't need to. Only need to operate when the kitchen's in action. And on here, we also covered as briefly fridges. I mean, I've been on site and seen big walk-in fridges where the doors open. I guess for ease of access back and forth from the kitchen. So just simple things like that, because you're creating greater cooling demand and then you're heating up the space in the kitchen. So yes, just obvious stuff. Boilers is really, maintenance. A good maintenance regime for boilers is really important. Make sure that your heat transfer surfaces are cleaned. And we say here at end of life, and boilers, they're pretty good, but they can create some maintenance issues. You don't want them to fail. What often happens is a boiler starts to fail and then a quick fix is required because there's been no planning done, and a gas asset gets replaced with another gas asset. So we thinking ahead here is pretty important, right? So look at when your assets are coming up to end of life and seriously consider replacing with a heat pump. Just quickly on insulation and glazing, yeah, if you've got exposed hot water pipes, make sure they're insulated. Insulation and ceilings, if it's not, that's something that should be done on older sites if it hasn't already been done. And double glazing can be a smart thing to do as well. Obviously, it limits heat loss in winter and heat gain in summer, and that's particularly in northern parts of the country where you start to see a bit of cooling demand because of all the heat that's all the solar gain coming through the windows. And the last one, just appliances and equipment. I think we said that it's around about 5% sort of across fridges and various appliances. So there's a few things here. Make sure that when you are looking at replacing or upgrading equipment, you take into account the energy ratings, which you can find, or this is managed by EECA, I believe. Ensure that TVs, printers, computers, that sort of thing have automatic sleep functions on. And with dishwashers, where possible, only run them when they're full. And it's the sort of thing that you could schedule, I think, to run off peak as much as possible to reduce the energy costs. You'll still be using the same amount of energy, but you'll be paying a lower rate for it if it's run off peak. And I believe that takes us on to the first breakout session, which is going to be introduced.
Is great. Yeah, we'll move into a short breakout session just to allow everyone a bit of time to have a chat about what we've heard so far. And we'll just run that for 5 minutes. So yeah, if we could be back here at 11:05, please, Margot. Remember to turn your mics on. Right, everyone is back in. So on the agenda, we now have planned just to have a short little halftime break. So we'll just take 5, go get a glass of water or a cup of tea or a bathroom break, and yeah, we'll meet back here at 11:10.
Presenting back after. Oh, she's gone. Meg, is that me presenting back when we come back?
Yes, that is back to Paul when we come back.
Okay. I just put a placeholder slide.
Something to look at.
Yeah.
See everyone soon. everyone. We'll jump into part 3 now, and then we'll have another breakout session and then the question and answer time. So don't forget to chuck any questions that you've got into the Q&A whilst we work through this next piece. Over to you, Paul. You're still on mute. I'm not getting any audio where I am. Just check your headphones are connected.
Thanks. How about now?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Right. So for the third time, I said I'm fully charged with my coffee. So thanks for the couple of minutes break to just deal with stuff. In the first session, Meg and I spent a little bit of time talking about the challenges with the energy ecosystem. We're all struggling from increased prices. Paul gave us some great tips and insights on how to reduce energy efficiency, and that leads into the benefits of acting now. And while the slide says transitioning away from gas, the ability to act now, drive energy efficiency, helps reduce your OPEX and the cash going out to your energy retailer, electricity, gas, LPG, diesel, whatever that energy form is that you are using. But if you are burning a fossil fuel, and if it's natural gas from the North Island or diesel, you will be seeing increased costs. Not so much with diesel at the moment, but who knows where the geopolitical goes. But certainly with natural gas, lack of availability into the future does mean needing to plan now for that transition away from gas, and look at what those options are. If you are on a time of use gas contract and you have a 3 or a 4 or a 5 year contract, the end of that contract is going to come around very quickly. So can only reiterate, you're better off starting that process now. As Paul said when he was talking about, the gas hot water boiler, if you don't have any plan in place for replacing that at a time that suits your business and one fails, you end up purchasing a piece of equipment that you might not want to have in your asset portfolio in the long term. Paul also mentioned the aged care retirement living pathway that the team at Lumen helped EECA pull together. It is a great self-help resource, helps give you guidelines, an understanding of what those opportunities look like. I'm not going to run through those pages. It is a self-help guide. The one good function on the EECA website is the search function. So do hit the magnifying glass, type in aged care or retirement living pathway, and you should expect to land on this page. Likewise, if you need to find any other tools before the slide packs come out, solar, any of those other things that are of interest to you, do just type them into the search function. What does transitioning away from gas look like? Electric and heat pumps is a good opportunity for many. A gas boiler or a diesel boiler typically has an efficiency of around 80 to 85%, i.e. you're putting in 1 litre of diesel or 1 gigajoule of gas and you're getting about 85% of the energy value out the other end. With a heat pump, you could realistically expect somewhere around 3 to 4 times the efficiency. So for 1 unit of energy in, you can expect 3 to 4 units of energy out. A heat pump takes various different forms. So the most common is an air source heat pump. Most of us are likely to have one at home, a little unit sitting outside and a unit sitting inside on the wall, and it can offer us either heating or cooling depending on the time of the year. So it's using whatever the outside air temperature is, putting it through the compressor, which is in that outside bit, along with either an evaporator or a condenser, and generating heating or cooling. So if it's hot outside, then it's going to obviously, but more likely be producing cool air inside, and on those cooler days, taking that cool air, putting it through the condenser and providing heating to us. Feels like a fridge, just doing a different function. And as a non-technical engineer, similar bits of equipment just built in a slightly different way. And then there are different forms of heat pumps depending on other resources that you have available to you. And so air-to-air or air-to-water are the most common heat pumps that most people can describe. So air-to-water is where you're using the outside air and then you're using it to heat up water rather than to heat up air. But there are a number of ground source heat pumps, either using lake or pond water, the ground temperature, and that can be through a couple of different systems, whereby instead of being subject to the vagaries of seasonal air temperatures, you're using a consistent heat form such as a lake or the ground temperature in the case of a geothermal style heat pump. Just gives you a bit more consistency as against that vagaries of outdoor air temperature. Meg used this picture earlier on. And so just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about Rainbow Nurseries in Auckland. And so they have a bank of air-sourced CO2 heat pumps using outside air temperature to heat hot water. And so it is off-the-shelf heat pumps. It's not specially built. Yes, they are bigger than the unit you and I would have at home, but I'm looking out the window of the office here, level 7 on the terrace, and seeing a similar size unit sitting on a number of buildings across the CBD. The thing that is interesting with Rainbow Park Nurseries is the big grey cylindrical thing in the background is water storage. And so they are using the heat pumps to generate 80-degree hot water that they're then reticulating around their nurseries, which could easily be being reticulated around your radiator system or your underfloor heating system inside your village complex. The reason they have a big hot water storage tank is it is enabling them to avoid using their heat pumps in those expensive times of the day, both in terms of electricity but also network connections. And so this project became very attractive in terms of financial payback for them, because they were able to use the cheapest times of energy on their electricity bills to generate their hot water, and then gives them the ability to use the hot water when they needed to use it as part of normal operation. So for the team inside the nursery, the stuff outside doesn't impact anything they do, but with good systems control, they're able to minimise the cost in operating the facility. Takara Hospital had a coal boiler. It was part of the public sector, state sector decarbonisation program to get rid of the coal boiler. They were using a gas boiler as their lead boiler and the coal boiler as their N-1 security to make sure their facilities were always warm. I look at this hospital, I've been to it a couple of times as part of this project. I'd say it's smaller than some of the larger retirement village campuses that I've been to, and so these solutions definitely work across larger facilities. In terms of bigger units, smaller units work well in smaller campuses. And so on this project, the heat pump is now the lead heating system for the hospital. They have retained the gas boiler as their N-1 security should something fail. My suspicion is in about 12 months' time, they'll decommission the gas boiler to not have the gas connection and build the redundancy into the heat pumps that they have. And because they've got multiple, if one fails, they still actually have enough there to keep the facility warm. there was a little bit of nervousness when the project first went in that on the coldest days the heat pumps wouldn't provide enough hot water, but that has not proved to be the case, which is one of the other reasons they did leave the boiler there in the background. The other options in the case of electric options is there is an electric resistive boiler and purpose steam generators as two different pieces of equipment, as against having a gas boiler or a diesel boiler that is making hot water, in some cases steam, for those requirements. There are electric options. Doesn't have to be a heat pump. There is an electric boiler option that probably doesn't look too dissimilar to a gas boiler, as you can see by the picture there. It comes in various different sizes, flavours and colours. The other option from a renewables energy perspective is biomass or wood energy. And so this is a graph that EECA often puts up when it's talking about bioenergy. It comes in three forms: hog fuel, wood chips, wood pellets. Comes in three different prices. So as we look across the screen, it gets more expensive as a fuel type. As we start on the left, hog fuel is bigger bits of wood. It has moisture in it, and it works for big industrials that are going through large volumes of wood and have suitable storage facilities. Often it is taking low-grade logs or residues out of the forest and putting them through a small seasoning process, but then straight into the boiler. Definitely not an option that you would consider across a retirement village, but wood chip might be, and is commonly used in parts of the South Island and parts of the North Island. Does have a moisture content, and so the drier the fuel, the better it burns. The difference between wood chip and wood pellet needs to be kept dry. Its consistency and its moisture content and the calorific value of energy that it delivers. A simple silo or a simple bunker to keep a wood pellet dry ensures the integrity of the product. One of the advantages with wood pellet over wood chip is you need a third less storage space than you would with wood chip. So that also means a third less truck movements onto site. As EECA was helping the Ministry of Education get rid of coal boilers out of schools, we very quickly showed them the benefit of wood pellet over wood chip in terms of truck movements onto a school site. And the less storage space, and hence being able to utilise the square footage they had for the core activities that they were there for, not for storing energy to provide heat across the school. The graph also shows that there's a correlation between the more expensive fuel type versus the capital cost of putting a boiler in. And so while wood pellet fuel might be more expensive than wood chip, the cost of putting that boiler in is often seen as cheaper than the wood chip boiler, because the wood chip boiler needs to deal with the vagaries of unknown moisture content across one day to the next. Just wanted to share a case study of wood pellet boiler, and so Somerset in building their new village in Auckland, St John's, clearly made a great decision not to put a natural gas boiler in, which would have been an easy option, as been done many times over the last X number of decades. But in wanting to reduce their CO2 emissions with long-term reliable fuel, elected to go with a wood pellet boiler, 6-storey building. So lots of complexities in terms of how to do it. Abacus, the supplier, done a great job of installing the system across a couple of levels. So the fuel comes in and is pumped into the fuel hoppers, which are on the left-hand side of the screen, and then the boiler's up on another level and through vacuum pipe feeds the boiler. and then out through the top of the boiler, out through the top of the building is the boiler flue. And so, yeah, is a credible solution providing low emissions fuel and heat to the site. We've seen similar boilers retrofitted across the Ministry of Education school estate, and in talking to Abacus and the other suppliers in this space, that are doing this work, they often talk about what's the available space, and so if you're taking a gas boiler out, they're pretty confident that they can find a way to ensure wood pellet boilers are able to go into that similar boiler room as the gas boiler or the diesel boiler was occupying. EECA is supporting the challenges across the market with some co-funding support for North Island natural gas users and diesel users in a stationary energy sense. Information is available on our website, and the products look fairly similar across both of those, where we've got a low-cost walkthrough assessment as a starting point, which EECA is 100% covering the cost of, through to those using slightly more energy with either a Type 3 energy audit or a feasibility study. So an energy audit would look for energy efficiency, and being a Type 3 would then focus on the boiler and what the options look like to switch that out, whereas a feasibility study would just be a straight assessment up front of the various options to switch away from that fossil fuel using boiler. But both of them definitely underline that talk to the needing to right size the boiler, so ensuring energy efficiency is there first. We are likely to come out with a new product in the next 3 or 4 weeks, which is a low cost feasibility option for those of you that might have a lower energy spend. So watch this space. I think that was all I was going to talk to at this point. Meg?
Yes, you made incredible time today. So yeah, we'll move through into our second breakout room now, and we'll just carve out 10 minutes for that. So if you could bring us all back here at 11:40, that would be great. Thank you, Margot.
Meg, we always seem to come back when we're deep in great conversation.
Just getting into the meaty stuff. Yep,
yeah.
I know exactly how you feel. All right. Well, we luckily do have a bit of time for questions. So if there was anything further that people had questions on or wanted to continue a discussion from the breakout room, now's your chance. I have already pre-populated the Q&A with a question for Paul.
Yep.
Have you had a chance to look at that? I
have, but before that, just having a really interesting chat with Julie. And this was, so we've tended to focus on like the operator's energy, not the individual resident's energy, i.e. independent living. And it was a really, really good discussion around, this particular site is a couple of hundred units. All have, well, not all, but most of them have some sort of gas or individual connections. And just some, discussion around, well, how do we support the 200 individual users to transition off gas as well? And so I think that's something that's worth really thinking about, maybe even as a sector, because I don't know how many, someone will know how many ILUs there are in New Zealand that have gas supply. There'll be thousands and thousands of them. And it sounds like in this particular instance, there is maybe the distribution company is charging like a gas termination fee, which is prohibitively expensive. So it creates a disincentive to actually fuel switch, because you get stung with this huge charge at the once you can disconnect from the network. So if that's happening on a widespread basis, I wonder if there's maybe an advocacy play or something like that, because that didn't seem fair and reasonable to me anyway, to have that termination charge.
I think that's a great topic to continue on as part of ongoing conversation, Paul. I quite liked your comment when you were going through the energy efficiency stuff about planning for asset replacement. And so the challenge for you as operators is, as you're refurbishing those units, as someone moves out of a villa and you're getting it ready for the next occupier, and you've got to replace the hot water system or the heating, is making sure you've got a policy that ensures you're not buying another gas asset, because in 5 or 6 or 7 years time, that might not be the asset that you're wanting to be operating. So I think there's that double play of considering what refurbishment of those units look like as the current occupier moves out, and you're readying it for the next as well.
Yep, agreed.
A pretty strong theme, I think, today of the planning well is what saves you in the long run. I actually did have a question for Paul. You sort of mentioned earlier about the getting your plans in place so that if an asset that's coming up close to end of life was to fail, then you could just kind of drop your replacement plans, and rather than getting that stuck into the sunk cost of another gas using asset, for example. Have you seen any examples of that happen in your? I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the retirement sector, but just across the work that you do. And I was also wondering what the insurance take on that is. Is that something that would be worth speaking to your insurance company about ahead of time?
Good question. I don't know about the insurance one, but I definitely look. We've seen, even just recently, we're talking to someone who's got a diesel boiler that they're replacing with a diesel boiler, and we're sort of like, okay, what drove that decision? And it was a decision that was made some time ago, right? They haven't implemented it yet, but it is the thing's failing, and we just basically go like for like because it's cheap and it's easy and we know what it is. And that's sort of probably been the default position, I think, over the years. Can understand why. But I think we do also, quite a few of these feasibility studies and things that we've done haven't necessarily eventuated to action immediately. And there's a number of reasons for that. Maybe the business case didn't quite stack up at the time. Maybe the capital funding within the business wasn't available, but at least that organisation knows what they should do to, in a future state. So I think it's better to have that than have nothing at all. And your capex and your opex and everything, you can update that. Certainly with opex, with energy costs going up, if we did a business case 5 years ago, it assumed probably gas prices at a relatively low level. If we do it today, those gas prices are going to be much higher. So that business case is going to look more favourable for switching now than it did 4 or 5 years ago. So I know there's a lot of organisations that have done some of that work, but as I say, haven't proceeded to action. If you've got one of those plans, it definitely would make sense to update it given 2026 scenario and see if it now meets the, whatever it is, the 5-year payback or 6-year payback threshold, whatever your organisation has. But sorry, you can't answer the insurance one. I don't know on that one.
No, it's all good. Might be a question for the insurance sector. And then just going back to that question that I popped up in the Q&A. What do you think are the most common or cost-effective opportunities for actually reducing that peak demand in retirement villages? We had a little bit of chat about that during the breakout room, with particularly it being sort of space heating, but also the hot water draw being quite high in the morning. What sort of opportunities do you see there?
Yeah, so it depends on whether or not the hot water is electric or not. So if it's gas, obviously currently there's not much you can do. But when you're designing your replacement system for gas, hot water storage would be the way to go. And I know the case study that Paul shared is really good. We've got a really good example as well for some work we've done. So with hot water storage, you're taking load out of the peak period And ideally, if you heat it up overnight, you're getting an off-peak electricity rate. So it's costing you a whole lot less to heat that water. And generally speaking, hot water storage itself is not overly expensive. So the heat pumps are expensive, but the hot water storage typically isn't a huge capital investment, but it'll pay itself off if you can, run it off peak. So that's one thing, but that's really planning ahead. In terms of the here and now, space heating's the main, and you saw on that Christchurch chart, it's all about the space heating. So, I mean, you don't necessarily want to turn stuff down and have a lower target temperature on a cold day, right? But we definitely think with newer buildings and good insulation and all that sort of stuff, that you can actually preheat the building and then taper off during that peak period, and then and come back again later on in the day. So, but I think you have to experiment a little bit in your own individual building and see what impact that actually does. Obviously, you don't want to have freezing cold residents, but I think there's some ways that you can test that. But that will be the single biggest impact you can have if hot water is not electric. Then you're looking at things like just general energy efficiency and upgrades. So if you still have a whole lot of LED lighting, those lights are going to typically be on maybe in the earlier part of that peak load period, so 8 o'clock in the morning. Maybe they come off at 9 or 10. But if you convert those from LED to LED, then you reduce your demand across all time periods. So that has an impact on your peaks. And then maybe things like where practical, and it won't always be practical, but things like we talk about dishwashers, but any appliances or things you can schedule to run. Maybe if you've got a laundry and you've got electric dryers, I know there's practicalities around when you have to have the laundry dry, but potentially you can schedule those to occur just outside of those peak periods. And we're really looking, I think, the 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. period primarily. Although some of the retail contracts, the price goes from 4 to 8 a.m. and then from 8 to midday. And the big jumpers in that, when you go from 8 to midday, the prices are a lot higher typically than the 4 to 8 a.m.
Then you get challenged. You get challenged on some of the networks where the morning peak starts at 7 a.m.
That's right.
So it is good to understand both facets. And if energy's not your thing, then the likes of Paul and his team or whoever your energy consultant, is the cheapest resource for you for the energy savings. I also think about underfloor heating. It's thermal mass and it holds temperature. And so I'm happy to come and give everyone a good swift kick if they need it. If you've got your heating system and it's electric heat pump or hot water storage running in the morning peak for your underfloor heating, because you'll hold enough temperature across that 4-hour peak, probably even beyond that, and into a series of days. So looking at the time that your equipment's running to ensure that you're not running it at that expensive either energy or network connection price time.
Yes, the first two steps, I guess, is really to just understand what your own demand curve looks like, and then understand how that overlaps with your transmission providers' peak times, right?
Yep.
Make sure that you're not trying to shift, making life difficult for yourself for no benefit.
Yeah, correct.
And so talking about hot water, we were having a great conversation in breakout room, and Mandy was sharing that their system, while it's currently gas, their storage tanks do have an electric element in it, which I think is a great solution regardless of what the heat source for the water is, because it's meaning you're using that low overnight electricity price to hold your water at temperature through an element, and then whatever your heating source is providing that top up when you've got big draw. And so it's important to consider those things as you're starting to plan what that transition looks like. And if you don't have that electric element in your storage, to look at that for your future storage needs.
Any other questions pop up in the Q&A? There is something in the chat though. What have we got here? AT refurb, we do change to electric. The one last question I had was for Paul Bull. You mentioned earlier talking about contract negotiations, aggregating with other types of businesses, and I just thought it would be interesting to get your thoughts on, given that a lot of retirement sector is going to have a similar demand curve, what kinds of businesses do you think would potentially be worth considering as an aggregation partner to sort of smooth that curve out and make the overall demand look a little bit more appealing?
And look, so some of that depends on what your connection looks like in your local community. So, if you've got an active business chamber of commerce, and you've got a green drinks once a month or once a quarter or whatever, talking with some of the others that are attending and going, how are you going to market? And finding other businesses to draw something locally. The benefit of using Lumen or any number of any other that are doing energy brokering is looking across their portfolio. So in this instance, if I'm using Paul as the example, Paul, I want you to take mine to the market. If you've got anyone else, can you group us together? Is the question I'd be asking Paul if I was taking my business to him. So, you're already paying him to do the brokering for you. Make him work a bit harder and smarter for the small price that you're paying to Paul. Paul, I'm sure you've got something you want to add to that.
Yeah, interesting. So from this goes back to my time being on the receiving end of group tenders when I was at Meridian, and we used to, when I first started there, we'd sort of go, yeah, cool, this is a bulk buying opportunity, heaps of volume. Are we keen on this? Yeah or no? And can it go both ways? Because quite often in terms of the gentailer retailer model, you might not actually be that interested in a particular type of load. So strangely enough, bundling a whole lot of users together can actually be a negative from a retailer's point of view. If they're not in the mood to take on a whole lot of load, then they will price to lose, basically. But if they are, then you might get a good deal. So there's all a government procurement that's good. That's a practice that's been going for a number of years, and within that, I believe, I could be wrong, but each individual entity typically gets a bespoke price for their usage and site. What we found at Meridian, when it was like a bunch of different entities that didn't have a lot to do with each other, was essentially we had to contract them all individually anyway, and there was nothing to bind all of the group to make the same decision. So we just treated it like we were responding to, say if it was 20 together, we were responding to 20 opportunities at the same time. So from your point of view, from the point you made, reducing the cost of procurement, totally, there is an element of that. But then I'd argue also that if I'm taking 20 clients to market at the same time, I'm not going to have the capacity to give them all the individual care and attention that they might require and come up with a really good solution for each one individually. And I think increasingly we look at, it's got more complicated, with solar, with peak loads, with all that sort of stuff, that I think there's value in a bespoke, approach. So the old days of here's the client, here's their energy consumption, give us a 2 and a 3 year price. That's the cheap and cheerful way to do it, I guess. But I think we try and think a bit more about that. Like, hey, what are you planning to do in the next couple of years? Are you going to put solar on? Do you think you can change your load profile? We try and take all of that into account and go to, with I guess a really well considered approach to market. And then obviously the solution in terms of the retailer and the structure that you choose to fit those requirements. So I'm not saying bulk buying is terrible, but I think it's worth looking at the individual approach as well.
And some of that is going to come to location. The market is changing quickly, as Paul says. If you happen to be in Kaitaia, the chance of getting a price from a solar farm developer that wasn't there 5 years ago may actually make your load profile match quite well to their generation profile. And a couple of them are working out how to give you a price through the periods when their panels aren't generating. So the market is definitely changing. If energy isn't your day-to-day thing, then my encouragement is find a broker that is working for you.
just in the chat that Maggie made a good comment about how needing to watch competition law if operators are working together on ways of doing things as well. So that's a good valid point there as well. Well, I think that's probably it for the questions. And so, yeah, I'll hand back over to Amanda now. And thank you everyone for listening in.
That's great. Thank you, Paul, Meg and Paul, for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. I sort of want to thank everyone who has participated in the discussions, the breakout sessions and the Q&A. The value of these workshops comes not only from the presentations, but also from the willingness of participants to share experiences and learn from one another. Today, we've covered a lot of ground, from understanding the future energy landscape and managing energy contracts through to practical efficiency opportunities, transition planning, financing options, and emerging technologies. Hopefully, you've come away with some new ideas, some useful resources, and perhaps most importantly, a clearer understanding of the next steps for your village. I'd like to give a big thank you to EECA and Lumen for partnering with the RVA to deliver today's workshop and for their ongoing support of the retirement village sector. A recording of today's session, along with any resources that can be shared, will be circulated after the workshop. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and for your commitment to improving energy efficiency outcomes across your villages. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at a future RVA event. Ka kite anō.